Farm is definitely a tower of all time. At first glance it may not look very fascinating, it has no abilities, doesn't do any damage, and doesn't provide any buffs to towers nearby. There is only one thing it does. It gives you cash after every wave, with amount depending on its upgrade. This mechanic sounds 2019, Farm was always ranked as S-tier tower by many people upon this day. But why was it and still is so praised by everyone? In this video, we will dive into history of Farm and see why this is truly the greatest tower of tower defense simulator. The Farm was one of the first original towers that existed when the game was first released. It was way different to other towers that existed back then. For starters, it was the only tower that didn't deal any damage as DJ didn't exist and Commander can attack with ability. It was also the only tower that could generate money as Cowboy didn't exist as well while Yeehaw, its original concept, was exclusive to developers. The thing is, Farm wasn't an original concept. When just released, TDS was very similar to Tower Battles and took many towers from it, including the Farm. However, even TB Farm wasn't the original concept. In fact, it came from Banana Farm, which came from BTD4, which was released back in 2009. Back to TDS, when Farm was first released, it was actually severely worse than now as it costed way more cash while giving less. However, even in its state, it was used a lot. This is because Farm allows you to get way more cash in late game while sacrificing early game savings. This is extremely crucial as without Farm, while you are chilling in early game, you are not able to get expensive towers down as easily, which may result in lack of DPS and therefore loss. In case of game's first release, this tower was Minigunner. While it wasn't as pricey as today's turret for example, it still wasn't in cheap category. So without Farm, you wouldn't be able to spam too much of them, which results in loss of lots of DPS. Farm became even more crucial when new tower was released about 2 weeks later. Ranger. It was second DPS tower and was, and still is, way more expensive than Minigunner. Because of that, Farm was crucial in getting them. Along with Ranger, however, a new tower that could generate cash has appeared. Cowboy. However, fortunately for Farm, he was, well, mid, and he only gave cash on max level via the ability, so I won't mention him until he is reworked to be similar to today's Cowboy. Farm also got small buffs during this period, supporting him even further. Farm was still far from perfect. It actually costed a lot compared to today's Farm and also gave lower income. So on July 10, 2019, Farm got a huge buffs on first 3 levels. Now Farm was even more dominant in meta than it already was. However, Below thought it wasn't enough and decided to buff it even further. On 13 October same year, it got the biggest statistical changes ever. There were nerfs as well, but overall this rebalance was a massive W for the Farm. It was way cheaper to place, allowing you to farm even faster. From this rebalance now on, Farm is officially considered S tier. From this moment, Farm became loved by the community and was a priority to unlock in the shop. More and more expensive towers like Turret and Accelerator arrived, making it even more needed. However, there was a 3-month moment where Farm was actually outclassed by another tower. You guessed it, Cowboy got reworked in May 28, 2020, and this rework made him make more cash than Farm when spammed while also providing defense. To make things even worse for Farm, Golden Cowboy also appeared and was overpowered. I'm not exaggerating when I say this was Farm's worst spot in its history and only time where it truly was outclassed. However, this didn't last long. On August 28, 2020, Hardcore Update was released which butchered many towers, including Farm's competitor, Cowboy. Farm got away and got no changes, and now with Cowboy being irrelevant, he was back into game. Farm was once again the best eco option and arguably tower in general due to how much help it provided. It's also a good idea to mention Hardcore mode itself. In Hardcore mode, besides being most difficult mode, all towers cost 50% more cash. This essentially made farm a required tower for this game mode, as without it you most likely wouldn't be able to afford anything above average priced unless you were playing solo. Farm was in a sweet spot, and it got rebalanced in October 29, 2020. Level 0 and 1 prices were swapped, which didn't impact it much. This was a massive nerf, as if all farms are maxed out, you would lose 3,000 cash every wave. However, it got reverted to days later and farm returned being meta. Believe it or not, this was the last change farm has ever received in its history. There were still some missed changes like new skins or some bug fixes, but they didn't impact it too much to the point where I need to mention them in detail. Also, I want to mention events' relationship with farm. This is because you cannot use farm in some of them. I mean, you can place them, but they won't produce any cash and therefore will be useless. And when they do generate cash, they are still bad choice, as you were usually provided with plenty of cash from enemies anyway. Despite farm's changelog being over, its history isn't, as there are two pretty big changes that happened where farm plays a role. First thing was Cowboy's many reworks. He received a lot of balance changes and reworks unlike farm, including its golden version. And at some points, it was debatable whether Cowboy primarily golden version was better than the farm. However, as purely eco tower, farm still came on top, while Cowboy provided a bit less eco but also damaged enemies unlike farm. Also, farm is better in duo quad while Cowboy's full potential opens in solo. Because of all that, I don't think it's adequate enough to compare farm with Cowboy in general. But once again, purely from eco, farm wins. The last thing I want to mention happened recently. In DJ rework, developers made it that you cannot discount farm anymore. This is pretty sad because now you always have to pay 25% more for farm upgrades. However, it doesn't impact tower enough to bring it down from S tier. Because tell me, how will you afford Gatling gun without farm not in solo? At the end, farm stood a test against time and is still S tier tower. And all that without any statistical changes for a total of 4 years. The thing is, farm is a requirement at this point. Most strategies use it, most loadout have it, and fundamentally, it's not going anywhere away. However, TDS has recently been reworking support towers like Commander and DJ, so farm may or may not be their next target, who knows? What we do know is that farm is the greatest tower in Tower Defense Simulator.